This is the first of several lessons that will focus on the interrelationship among social structure, social interaction, and the social construction of reality. Refer to the last 4 pages of the second study guide and chapter 4 in your textbook. Spend some time down at the bottom of the 11th page and in chapter 4 acquainting yourself with exactly what is meant by social structure. This is a working definition, and bear in mind again that it highlights 2 of the 3 assumptions on which sociology is based. First, we humans are social. Secondly, much of our behavior exhibits patterns and regularities. Pay particular attention on the 11th page to the concepts of structured, social, and interaction. Bear in mind again that human social interaction is symbolic. In short, we attach meanings to our interactions with others. Our expectations, our interpretations, our reactions affect others. In turn, their interpretations, their expectations, and reactions influence us. We humans don't just react. We consider that to which we are responding. Now, if you go over to the 12th page of the study guide, I'd like for you to become familiar with what's sometimes referred to as the very building blocks of social interaction. There are some very important terms here that I want you to become familiar with. The first we've already investigated, social norms and values. Let's focus attention on the second, status, or statuses. And if you will, take for just a moment looking at the definition of status and compare that to roles. This is position. This, on the other hand, is how we're supposed to behave when we occupy that position. This is something we play. This, on the other hand, is something that we occupy. So status is position. Now, you should be able to, again, distinguish among statuses that are ascribed, achieved, and also what is meant by master status. Let's go into this in some detail. You want to remember again that the line between an ascribed and an achieved status isn't always clear, and sometimes people will also confuse the term status and roles. This is something you might look at for just a moment. Notice again, a status is a position. Notice the distinction between an ascribed status and one that is achieved. This is yet another way to focus on the difference between an ascribed status and one that is achieved. Also, if you'll notice, there are some examples. So an achieved status is one you basically earn through your effort. An ascribed status is assigned, often very early in our lives, often at birth. Now, what kind of status is this? Achieved or ascribed? Now, if you picked up very quickly on the fact it's an achieved status, you are correct. Here's another way to look at an ascribed status. Okay? Notice again, a position assigned to a person by society without regard to that person's special or unique talents or characteristics. An elderly woman, okay, an African American male, a white female. Sex is a classic example. Age is a classic example of an ascribed status. Now, let's go back. and focus on a couple of other aspects that are noted here. And kind of bear these in mind if you wish. Some statuses are achieved only by you as well as me working through some kind of formal arrangements or structures. We've got to meet certain clearly defined standards, such as getting a college degree, a law degree, or a medical license. On the other hand, when it is, again, a situation where you and I become the fan of a particular baseball or football team, that's pretty easy. So some achieved statuses require an enormous amount of effort. You've got to work within formal structures. Others we can pick up quite easily. Ascribed statuses can influence the statuses that one achieves. For example, in our society, highly desirable statuses are more frequently going to be filled by those who share certain ascribed characteristics, because those ascribed characteristics carry with them genuine advantages or benefits. I think you'd all agree with me. Being born into a relatively well-off family, one that is wealthy, perhaps one's ethnic heritage, one's gender, all of these are going to play a role to one degree or the other. They're going to figure into, since I don't want to play too much with the term role, into whether or not someone can achieve a particular status. Now, there's some less desirable statuses out there that are often pretty easily achieved, especially if someone is born into poverty or at the lowest levels of the socioeconomic class system. Certain criminal activities, the use, or for that matter, addiction to illicit drugs. I'm not suggesting by any means whatsoever that this is unique only to folks there. I'm simply pointing out the fact that sometimes when we try to achieve a highly ranked status, often ascribed elements we have will work to our advantage. Sociologists find ascribed statuses very, very interesting because of the point I was trying to make just a moment ago. They confer onto people privileges as well as power. For example, some folks may be thought of as being naturally superior to others, especially if they are native born, if they're male, if they're young, if they're heterosexual. And although people, again, can't change ascribed statuses, some have and do work to alter some of the characteristics associated with them. Can you think of examples of movements that have accomplished that very end? If you've come up with the civil rights movement and the women's movement, those are two illustrations. And you also want to remember that achieved statuses are often dependent on some ascribed statuses. Some ascribed statuses can make it more difficult to achieve some statuses. Certain ascribed statuses may make it easier for some people to achieve some statuses. One's race, ethnicity, age, gender, all of these can affect that person's ability to achieve certain statuses. For example, the status of male still figures significantly into one's chances of being hired as an airline pilot. There's still far more male airline pilots than there are female airline pilots. Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, but some argue she probably would have never enjoyed that position or her earlier position as senator had she not come from a wealthy family. Now, bear in mind, and it's important you remember this, that we can change achieved statuses. Try to think of some in your own life experiences as such. Now, master status is somewhat different. Notice here again, this is a really good working definition of a master status. It's just that one by which you're primarily known. It's going to override all others. This is primarily the way people are going to view you. I found this interesting and somewhat humorous old cartoon. If you're having some difficulty reading it, and I'm going to stretch forward just to read it for you, how would you like for me to answer the question? This gentleman says, as a member of my ethnic group, educational class, income group, or religious category? Well, that more or less highlights a master status. Do you recognize this gentleman? Perhaps one of the most brilliant people ever to live. Many people refer to him as this era's Albert Einstein. What you want to remember again is that sometimes people with disabilities will discover that all the other statuses in their lives are subsidiary, they're secondary. This is Stephen Hawking, an astrophysicist, remarkable person, made major contributions. But is it possible there's still some people that only see him as a disabled human being suffering from ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease? Do any of you recognize this outstanding actor? You catch the role here, Gandalf or Magneto in the X-Men films. This is Ian McKellen. Yet, despite his remarkable accomplishments in the area of acting, both on stage and motion pictures, there are a lot of people, again, once they learned that he was gay, this is how they see him. That's become his master status, if you will. Now, you want to remember, too, that when it comes to you and I performing our roles, bear in mind, if you will, that there is what's sometimes referred to as a role set. A role set. This, again, notice the number of roles attached to a single status. Can you come up with any? Are there any that you recognize? I suspect, again, if you give some serious thought to this, you all can come up with a number of different examples. A mother. Okay? How many roles are associated with that particular status? Kind of mind-boggling, right? Teacher, lover, disciplinarian, food provider, etc. Even got to be a doctor, got to be a counselor, if you will. Okay? So, role set. A number of roles attached to a single status. Now, some of you may very well have gone through a process of what's called role exit. You've had to adjust out because of the fact you've moved out of a former role. Edenbaugh points out again that there are several stages we go through when we exit a role. Have any of you exited a role as of late? Have you broken up with a significant other, gone through a divorce, graduated from a program, perhaps left one job and moved into another? Well, usually the first step in the process is we experience some frustration and confusion. We might even get burned out with respect to our current role. That's the doubt factor. That's usually followed by us seeking some kind of alternatives. Maybe again a couple separates, or a person who's really burned out on their job takes a leave of absence to catch their breath. That's generally followed by a turning point. Here one decides that they've got to do something. So again, unhappy people in the marriage file for a divorce, or someone resigns from their current position. And last but not least, there's the creation of a new identity. Here, someone, perhaps after getting a divorce, starts dating again, starts seeking out new activities or lifestyles, or seeks out a new job. Now, this is not always a positive step, or is it easy? One might discover that, yeah, I got this new job, but I really don't have the training. The expectations were far above and beyond me. one other key element that makes up social structure, and I want to ask you to think a minute about social structure. Remember again that social structures influence how you and I act. But in turn, we humans create, reproduce, and change social structure. So another key player in all of this is what's called social networking. But I wanted to mention very quickly the fact that there's a difference between role expectations on the one hand and role performance. Very important that you keep this in mind. Role expectations are what we're ideally supposed to do when we play a role. Okay, that's role expectations. Role performance is how we actually perform the role itself. There's some examples of this that I might highlight. 4 remarkable women. Serena Williams to the left, and again, this young woman is Lindsey Vonn, a great American skier, and down at the bottom, Jeannie Finch, an outstanding Olympic softball player, and Candace Parker, great women's basketball player. Now, if you'll notice, they're all being posed in a somewhat provocative way. Not totally so, with respect to, again, Candace Parker. But again, how big will she get? And the fact that she's pregnant. There's a clear-cut suggestion, yeah, she's a great athlete, but she's a woman. If you look at Vonn, Serena Williams, and particularly, again, Jeannie Finch, it's almost like they're being presented as babes. Okay, notice the exaggerated stance of this remarkable female skier. And notice Serena Williams is appearing essentially in the nude. So one of the things that I want you to kind of keep in mind here is that as women have entered into traditionally male-oriented areas in our society, they've found frequently they've got to negotiate between different role expectations. Even though they're doing things that men do, there's that constant reminder that they're first and foremost females. Now, social networks. Social networks, working definition down at the bottom of the 12th page, they're very much like a spider's web. Spiders weave webs to catch prey. Now, we don't use our social networks for that purpose, but again, think of a social network in this way. My hope is this might illustrate it as well. That's you, that's me. Now, if you'll notice, there is a kind of primary circle of friends. These are people we're close to. We have tight primary ties with these folks, sometimes highly emotional ties. But through them, we know other people. And through these people, we know even more people, who know even more people, who know even more people. We might even indirectly have connections to the president. Because, again, if this is you, one of your professors might know a university president. That university president may know a U.S. representative. That U.S. representative knows the President of the United States. Social networks are complex and elaborate. They provide us with a lot of emotional and social support. And I think a lot of you recognize, how have you used your social network? Well, for me, I used it to get a job. Actually, how I entered into community college teaching was through connections to an old college girlfriend. Her father happened to be the academic dean at the undergraduate school that I attended. I learned through her that her father's former college roommate had been appointed president of a brand new community college in another state. That's how I landed my first teaching gig in the community college environment. So think in the context of social networks. People who have elaborate social networks have a lot of support they can fall back on. As a matter of fact, what's rather interesting is the fact that some of the folks, again, who took it on the chin in the worst way in Hurricane Katrina were those folks with only a small social network. Once again, social class figures into this. People at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale may not necessarily have as elaborate and complex a social network as folks at the middle and upper class background levels might have. This has been a rather lengthy lesson, but at the same time, it includes very important information.